Two things were made abundantly clear throughout the premiere of Star Wars The Skeleton Crew. One, this show is intended only for children, but also that this show is going to be a fun ride for the whole family. Let's talk about it. All right, guys, Brent here, back with variants. We cover all things Marvel, DC, Lord of the Rings, anime, gaming, Star Wars, and more. This time, the Skeleton Crew. I gotta say, it was a rather enjoyable two-episode premiere. We ended off episode two finally getting to be introduced to Jude Law's character, who I believe we met at the beginning of episode one. In the beginning of episode one, we met Silvo, who's leading a crew rather poorly, I might add, of space pirates who were going in off and seizing different things. They were trying to look for more loot, for more credits, trying to find as much money as they possibly could. And ultimately, Silvo came up a little bit short. He ended up basically failing his crew, got mutinied, and that was the last we saw of him. We got kind of a decent introduction into his crew, and we got to see kind of what they were like in the background. For all intents and purposes, they really are not going to be the most swell of people. But again, hey, we got to have a villain here somewhere. We pick off literally ending up at Atten, which we come to learn is apparently a legendary planet of just old Republic credits in near mint condition that has treasures nigh imaginable, the likes of which your eyes and mind couldn't perceive or believe. Where ultimately we have four main characters really kind of come into place. For all intents and purposes, we have Wim, who is kind of our goofball character, who's the adventurer type, makes the bold and rash decisions, does not really think many things through, just kind of goes with the flow and is searching for more and more adventures in life. Ultimately, we see that he has a single father and that his mom is gone. Wim is someone who just dreams of adventures in the Sith and the Jedi and being super heroic and super adventurous and living that crazy, insane life that just at Atten doesn't have. It's a peaceful utopia where they have a barrier around the entirety of the planet, so they can't be found. No one can go in and no one can go out for all intensive purposes. And that leaving is against the rules, as we find out later on throughout the episode. His best friend is Neil, who is a blue elephant alien who has got a nice, happy family. He's got a bunch of siblings. He's got the twins. He's got his youngest brother, Tulo, and they just kind of all hang out together and have a good time. Things are fine. He's a bit of a dork, so of course he hangs out with Wim. They're close. They're having a good time. Things are fun for all intents and purposes. He doesn't really have to worry about too much. He's more of the keeping things focused, as where Wim is, of course, going to be whimsical. That's what they were going for with the character, and it just kind of seems to fit to a T. Neil just kind of follows whatever Wim decides to do, but again, we'll occasionally call him out, but is definitely more of the follower. Expect him to follow more of the truffle shuffle character S trope because this show is literally copying and pasting a significant portion of what the Goonies had and just putting a Star Wars twist on it and putting in Jude Law so we'd all just kind of look right past that perspective. We also picked up two other key characters. One is the name of Fern. She is kind of the renegade BA of the group. Think Princess Leia, but more of an attitude problem. A lot younger, but still more of an attitude problem. She's definitely the renegade of the group. She's more of a self-assertive leader. She's able to do the quick wit, the quick thinking. She's kind of a perceived liar. She just kind of makes up these really, really tall tales and spins these grandiose stories where people will just kind of believe just about anything. But again, it's a lie from a child for it to be of sound mind, not really going to be something that we're all generally going to believe in. And she has a trusty sidekick who happens to be one of my favorite characters that we've been introduced to thus far, KB. She has a really cool set of eye goggles that kind of pop up when she's not necessarily using them, and down when she's kind of like focused on more of the mechanic side of things. She seems to really pick up on space bikes and she's able to pick up on space tech very, very quickly. She's got a really, really keen eye for what's going on in the world around her. She is the smarts to everything going on with KB, well, for everything that's going on with Fern's other smarts, I should say. Fern is more of the street smarts. KB is the know-how. Put the two of those together, you got a rather formidable duo. They're significantly better off than Wim and Neil are, but again, they all kind of get stuck lumped together. because ultimately they were going to go have a grand assessment, which is going to decide your whole career and your whole path, which of course Wim decides to accidentally sleep through, then tries to take a shortcut through the forest because he saw Fern and KB go through it. And so he figured, hey, I can easily do this. Ends up, falling off his bike down a ravine, ends up stumbling upon what appears to be like a hatch to some kind of secret Jedi temple that he has. That ultimately we come to find out after he gets, picked up, gets in trouble with his father, and then ultimately then runs back off to go get Neil involved. But of course, he decides to accidentally bungle the location, to which Fern and KB are now keen on. So they all end up meeting up at this little hatch. And Fern is like, all you boys aren't strong enough. You can't do this. You can't move this dirt. And through the power of beautiful reverse psychology on a child, ultimately manual labor is achieved. And thus, we're eventually able to kind of make our way inside of this. For all intensive purposes, it looks like an empty cargo ship. And as they're kind of going through here, Fern has the very, very one direct rule: don't touch anything. So, of course, Wim decides to touch something, launches the ship off into space, and wakes up the droid on the ship, who we now come to know as SM-33. SM-33 has more personality in himself than most of the droids we've ever seen in Star Wars, period. The fact that we had an organic voice as opposed to AI is a huge win for Star Wars in general, because that's exactly what you'd want to hear as a child. You don't want to hear Alexa, or you don't want to hear Siri, or whatever the case may be pertaining to your AI robot. You want to have someone who sounds almost humanoid, almost kind of like General Grievous did for us back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it just kind of seems like they picked up on that well, and they're reading the room correctly in that regard. So good job, Disney. You got a big win there. And for all intents and purposes, they wake up the robot. The robot's like, look, our ship is damaged. We need to go to make repairs. I can take it to a port. I don't know what At-Aten is. At-Aten doesn't even exist in his mind. He doesn't compute it. He doesn't understand it. They accidentally may have crash landed there, and everyone who's on that ship ended up just not surviving. So for all intents and purposes, they end up going to this spaceport, and this spaceport called I want to make sure I get this right. Port Borgo is where they end up, and they end up stumbling across the crew that basically mutinied or shanghaied Silva for all intents and purposes. Come to find out that the money that Wim was given for his lunch money, because his single dad was out working late, doing extra overtime because he had a career assessment review. We've all been there. Ended up giving him some lunch money and Old Republic credits that are in mint condition. Ultimately given to Wim. Wim flashes this while he's trying to just buy some lunch while hanging out with Neil. Turns into a whole series of shenanigans where they end up being attacked by the pirates and ultimately taken into the brig, and much to the chagrin of SM-33, who gets shot with an electronic blast that basically seizes him and basically just MP blasts him back into the Stone Age to where he's no longer useful. In comes in Jude Law, who of course has the power of the Force or some type of weird magnet underneath his sleeve. I don't really know why, but again, if you have the ability that you have, I don't know why you waited till a bunch of children showed up to now decide to break out of this brig that you're in. Ultimately, he's able to grab the key, and then he's just like, hey, can everyone keep a secret? So we have made a weird friend who I'm not entirely certain of whether we should trust, but it seems fun. It seems enjoyable. If you got a family, go ahead, check this out. If you're one of those more mature adult fans where you can't really just live in the mind of a child like you used to, the series ain't for you. Don't waste your time. But again, be sure to hit that lovely red subscribe button, because I've just taken up 8.5 minutes of your time. Clearly, there's something in the content that you enjoy. I'll be back later on this week to cover Creature Commandos, as well as Dragon Ball Daima, Dan to Dan, Blue Lock, and all the other great series that we have going on here at Geek Variants. I'll see you in the next one.